Welcome everyone to the Policy Board meeting, and we gave a couple extra minutes because I think the elevators were working worse than the New York City subways this morning. So, but we'll get going now because I know there's a couple of people that want to get on the road, and we want to get to the South Atlantic Board as quickly as we can. So, without further ado, let's get into it. The first need the approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? Okay, we do have a couple of additions. Other business. Jonah crab, striped bass, spiny dogfish, eel, and sea herring. Maybe I should have put down what we're not adding to the agenda.
It's just letters.
They're just letters, so it'll hopefully be very quickly. Any other additions to the agenda? All right, seeing none, we'll take that as approved. We have the proceedings from the August 2018 meeting. Are there any changes, additions to the proceedings? Seeing none, we'll adopt those by consent. Next on the agenda is public comment. Any items that are not on the agenda, we offer the public a time to comment on them. Are there any comments from the public? Seeing none, we'll move to the update from the Executive Committee. Oh, that's me. Okay. The Executive Committee met yesterday, and we went over several items, so I'll go through them quickly. The first was the fiscal year 2018 audit. Laura's done a terrific job once again. We had a very good audit with no findings. If you want to read it, it's great for insomnia because it's just an exciting document, and it was very, very well done, and we essentially had a good finding. So it was put before the Executive Committee by the AOC, and essentially approved by unanimous vote. Then we got into the plus-up funding, which was the extra money that we've gotten, which Bob can give you all the details, but I'll just go quickly into. We had about $400,000 from federal funds this year. So we had put a list out of ideas from the last meeting of what we could spend the money on. And there were different versions of that. We had some short-term, very quick priority projects. There was also some shorter and longer-term, some that were a little more expensive and some that were maybe requiring recurring funding. There were suggestions about improved staffing. So what we decided, at least yesterday, we're not sure of this funding, if it's going to be persistent or it's going to change. So we decided to take the Solomon approach, and so we essentially approved all of the immediate projects for about half the money. I think it was $217,000. Bob, thanks. And we're leaving about $200,000 in the hopper right now. The projects that we approved, and were they in the meeting materials, Bob? Okay, so let me. I don't know if anybody's interested in the details of it, but it was about 5 or 6 projects, striped bass tagging. Go ahead, Bob.
I can go through them real quickly. Yeah, striped bass tagging, hook and line survey for this winter, some lobster growth and maturity work, some funding to provide travel resources for a working group to determine the details on staffing and the logistics of an offshore lobster enforcement vessel. The 4th project was the Nantucket Shoals, Georges Bank herring spawning monitoring for sea herring, and the 5th project was designing an aerial and acoustic survey for Menhaden in the Chesapeake Bay. So those are the 5 projects. Happy to answer any more questions or give you more details offline if you want them.
Questions? Adam.
So what's going to be the way forward for the rest of the money? If we have other ideas, forward it to leadership? Is there some other oversight group? What's the way forward with other ideas for the remainder of the money?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a great question, Adam. There's almost 2 layers of decisions. As the chairman mentioned, we had about $400,000. We committed about $200,000 into these 5 projects that I just mentioned. So there's money left over for this year's plus up. And what you suggested is right. If there's ideas that individual commissioners have, or individual management boards come up with ideas, we'll feed that to the executive committee, and they can decide if they want to allocate funds to that. But the second sort of layer of decision making is we're hoping this plus-up money becomes the new baseline. So if it is, then there's another $400,000, $500,000 in the Atlantic Coastal Act funds available to the states. So the question will be, how much of that money should come to ASMFC to fund individual projects, and how much of it should be distributed directly to the states, put into the formula that's used to allocate the Atlantic Coastal Act funds to the states? And so that's the executive committee is going to talk more about that at the February meeting to try to decide, how to allocate this fund. There's kind of short-term $200,000, and there's long-term plus-up money that needs to be allocated either to the commission for projects or staffing, or formulaically out to the states.
Other questions for Bob? Oh, Richie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Does this money have an end date? Does it have to be spent by a certain time, or does it roll over? If we don't spend it this year, does it roll over and you can use it the following year?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. We've got 5 years to spend it, so it's not burning a hole in our pocket right now, so we can take a little time and figure out high priority projects.
Any other questions for Bob? Okay, moving on, the next item was a change to the appeal process. There was a group working on this led by Jay McNamee. We essentially reviewed it. There was essentially changes to the appeal process that are mostly clarification points, and particularly in some of the criteria. So most of the document has remained the same except for the tightening up of the language. And so there's an expansion of that. We discussed it quite a bit yesterday, but after that discussion, the executive committee at least approved it to move it to the policy board. So what we're going to do is get the improved language that you guys have put together, and we're going to put that out to the full commission, and then we'll discuss it at the February meeting in terms of if we want to adopt that as a new appeals process. Do you have anything to add, Jay? Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. Next, we want to approve the approval of the Aquaculture Committee. Several of the states had submitted individuals to be on the Aquaculture Committee. I actually don't have the full list in front of me, but there was still an opportunity for a couple of states, I think Connecticut, I don't remember all of them, hadn't submitted names yet, but they're still open for adding in, so we will finalize that. But the list that was submitted has been approved, so we'll start moving forward on the Aquaculture Committee. So any of the states that haven't submitted a name should get them in before they get their first meeting going. So next agenda item was the quarterly meeting schedule. There was discussion about the sequencing of the meetings at these, and in particular, we've had this issue for some time, is that typically we would go from north to south with different species boards, and over times it has changed in putting the meetings in different locations. If you're around a few years ago, the ACCSP meeting was the last meeting, so all the state directors got the joy of staying here till the end of the meeting. And some of the northern state guys had already come in Sunday night, so they had a very long week. So we've been trying to get the meeting to make it fair and more efficient for everybody, so that we can find a better sense of it. The last couple of meetings, however, the South Atlantic Board has always been last, and there's been some travel issues with them on that last day. So what we agreed to do, and Bob and I and the staff will look at this, is to try to find some alternatives to find the best solution for making it more convenient for everyone. And that may include alternating, maybe one of the boards that someone will have to suffer for the last meeting every meeting, and then the southern guys may have to come Sunday night. So and it's only an issue when the Super Bowl is on, I'll tell you that right now. So anyway, so we are going to look into that and see if we can come up with some different options on that. We'll discuss it at the next executive committee meeting, and hopefully, make this better for everybody. Any questions on that? Okay, seeing none. Then we had a report from the awards committee with Spud Woodward has led really elegantly for the last several years, and even hung on to it when he went from state director over to an appointee. So Spud actually brought up some good points, and I know, having served on the awards committee years ago, how difficult it can be because there's just so many terrific people you get, and sometimes it's pretty hard to sort them out and really separate out the greats from the super greats. So Spud had come up with some suggested criteria for helping the awards committee make that decision easier. So I think it was well received by the executive committee, and we're going to look into that and discuss it probably at the next meeting. But it seems like a good step forward to really help everybody out, and also help people out nominating folks, so it gives them what really is important in terms of the commission. So, Spud, do you have anything you want to add to that? Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, seeing none, I believe that was the last item on the executive committee. Yes, okay. All right, just a second. Okay. Now we're going to have an update. Item number 5 is an update on risk and uncertainty policy, and Jay McNamee is going to lead us on that one. Jay?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I had gotten permission from Tony before to not do my pathetic Tiny Tim walk up to the front, so I appreciate you letting me speak from my chair. So we've had the risk and uncertainty momentum got a little stalled out due to breaking body parts and staffing changes and things like that. But we're back in action, and I'll thank Sarah Murray really got this back on track, and I really appreciate that. So we brought our current state to the Assessment and Science Committee, got a little feedback from them. We were looking for some guidance on what they thought the best next steps were for the risk and uncertainty policy. And so we had a good discussion. What came out of that meeting was a sense that we should send this, try and operationalize it, and we should send it to a technical committee to work through. The working group, as far as the pulling together the structure, we had done about as much as we could do at that point, so now we need to get it to a technical committee to kind of work through and figure out where it's going to break and where it is going to work well. And so we thought that was a good idea. It makes sense, since we've been doing this in the context of striped bass, which was the guidance from this board, that should be the first technical committee we send it to. We will absolutely make sure they get through the peer review for the benchmark and get clear of that before we drop this in their lap. So we will be very cognizant of that. Another one that came up, and it's also an assessment that's in process right now, is lobster. And so that was the other potential test run that we could do with the risk and uncertainty policy. So the next steps are, we are going to develop now a guidance document, and we're going to pull that together. This will be the document that will guide the technical committee through the decision tree piece of it. It will also be guidance for the management boards for their piece of that as well. So we are going to pull that together while the striped bass committee is finalizing the benchmark assessment, and then once they're clear of that, because that's going to end all of the striped bass tasks at that point, so they'll have plenty of time. We will we'll bring that to them and try and work with them to give this a test run. So that's where we are at. Once we get all that done, we will bring it back to this board and give you the results. That's it, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Jay. Questions for Jay? Okay, seeing none, great job. Keep it up, Jay, and we'll look forward to your next meeting results. Okay, we're really cooking right along. All right, we're going to have an update on the Northeast Area Monitoring and Assessment Program, and Nicole Lingell is going to lead us on that one. Nicole?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today I'll be presenting an update on the Northeast Area Monitoring and Assessment Program. It's been a little while, I think since 2013, since an update on this program has been given. So I'm going to start out by giving an overview of the program, what is NEMAP, some of the data uses, and the existing surveys under the NEMAP umbrella. And then I'll review some program activities, the program structure, the newly revised mission, goals, and objectives. That should have been in your meeting materials. And finally, some funding and next steps for the program. So what is NEMAP? NEMAP is a cooperative state and federal program facilitating fishery independent data collection, analysis, and dissemination in the Northeast area, from Maine to North Carolina. One misconception about NEMAP is when you typically ask someone what NEMAP is, they think of the VIM survey, the Southern New England Mid-Atlantic Inshore Trawl Survey. And one thing that we're really looking to do is change that misconception and really get it out there what the program is, and that it's a fishery independent data collection program. It's not just one survey. And in actuality, we have 3 surveys under the NEMAP umbrella right now. So we have the Southern New England Mid-Atlantic Nearshore Trawl Survey run by VIMS, but also the Maine, New Hampshire Inshore Trawl Survey and the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries Bottom Trawl Survey are all currently under the NEMAP umbrella. And another thing that the program is looking to do in the coming years is really expand what surveys are included in NEMAP, and not just limit it to trawl surveys, but expand it to other surveys as well. So currently, NEMAP has several partners, all the state marine fisheries agencies from Maine to North Carolina, including the District of Columbia, ISMFC, PRFC, New England Fisheries Science Center, both councils, and the Fish and Wildlife Service. We also have collaboration with CMAP, where we get advice from a programmatic and process standpoint, and we also collaborate with them on technical workshops. And these partners are using this data for a variety of analytical applications, and it's been very informative in species stock assessments. Here's a list of stock assessments NEMAP data has been used in. Apologies if we're missing any species here, but the list is pretty lengthy, and we expect it to continue to grow. The use in stock assessments may be as an index of abundance, but also a lot of information is contributed in other ways, including information on fecundity, length-weight relationships, size or age composition outside the fishery, stock structure in areas where the fishery doesn't operate, and shifts in distribution that may not be apparent within the fishery. Typically, fisheries can operate on a small spatial scale, and the NEMAP program covers a much larger geographic range. The Southern New England Mid-Atlantic Survey covers the largest area, surveying from Cape Hatteras all the way to Cape Cod, Massachusetts. It's a coastal trawl survey that began in 2006. It encounters 142 species in 2017, with spot, scup, weakfish, Atlantic croaker, and bluefish in the top 20 species by count. Some new technology that was added in 2018 was a new bioacoustic system. They're collaborating with the Science Center to currently analyze this data, and the end goal of using this bioacoustic system is to generate biomass estimates. They've also done away with their old YSI unit, and they've added a new Seabird Plus unit to the survey. This new unit not only measures your typical environmental parameters, depth, water temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, but it also measures pH, photosynthetically active radiation, chlorophyll A, and turbidity. The Maine, New Hampshire survey, also an inshore trawl survey, operating since 2000, has a seasonal time series of abundance for over 25 species of fish and invertebrates. 2017 season saw a very successful tow rate, higher cooperation from fixed gear fishery, and 92 species encountered. The Mass DMF survey has been operating since 1978. 195 unique species, scup, spiny dogfish, and winter flounder in the top 10 by count and weight. And the fall 2018 survey caught its first harvest fish and stargazer in the survey history, and both of those are pictured up there. Switching to Fishery Scientific Computer System 2.0 for the 2019 spring survey. And although it hasn't been adopted as a NEMAP survey yet, being in New York, we thought we would highlight the New York survey that began last year. So the new trawl survey in New York began in the fall of 2017. Scup, summer flounder, spiny dogfish, black sea bass, horseshoe crab, winter flounder were all among the top 20 species by weight, and it encountered 85 species. And so this is an example of one of the surveys that could be adopted under NEMAP going forward. So now that I've touched on some of the highlights from the surveys, every survey has its challenges. And as with mobile gear fisheries, fixed gear interactions are consistently a problem, not just with the NEMAP surveys, but several partners have informed us that they're experiencing this problem as well. An example of how one survey has been dealing with this is the state of Maine. They actually put a lot of work into putting out notifications. They put out on their website what their survey schedule is going to be. They put out maps. They also do mailings out to their lobster license holders to let them know when the surveys are going to be going out and with maps. So there's been a lot of work to work with the fixed gear industry to prevent these interactions, but nonetheless, they still remain a challenge for the surveys, and we don't expect that that'll go away in the future. Offshore wind sighting is one that's relatively new in the past few years. As I'm sure most of you are aware, offshore wind is something that has really taken off on the outer continental shelf and offshore waters, and in Rhode Island we have one in state waters. And how the surveys are going to operate among these wind farms as they continue to pop up along the coast is a question that we're starting to try to address. We certainly don't have an answer or a clear understanding of how we're going to be able to work together, but it's definitely one that we're starting to talk about. And long-term funding with increased operational costs remain a problem for the surveys. So some of the program activities since the last update was given, there have been several survey methods workshops. In 2013, there was an onboard data processing workshop with survey leads from across the NEMAP region. In 2015, there was a catch processing workshop hosted by CMAP in Charleston, South Carolina, and survey leads from NEMAP and the CMAP regions. And in 2019, we're looking to have a maturity staging workshop with potential collaboration with CMAP as well. So in 2018, the committees and the program have really kicked off some activity, and we're really trying to keep this momentum going. So it started in January and February, where we had a NEMAP summit, and we revised our program structure and committee roles. Program visioning and development of program tasks, increased focus on improving NEMAP data utility, and efforts to incorporate new and emerging technologies. So the NEMAP summit, we had people from various NEMAP committees, including the operations committee, and a lot of these challenges were discussed: the adoption of new surveys, the adoption of new standards, the committee roles. All of this was discussed in great detail, and most of the committee members are really excited about the potential for this program to really take off and keep the momentum going in the future. CMAP joint annual meeting was in July, and Jim Gartland served as our NEMAP liaison. And we had an operations committee call in September to follow up on the NEMAP summit and go over our action items and continue our planning for 2019. So one of the things that we talked about at the summit was the NEMAP structure. And not that we want to, make significant changes to the structure, but one of the things that we would like to do is have the operations committee serve as the new program lead, with the NEMAP board serving as liaisons to agency leadership. You can see there's some blue boxes and some green boxes. So the blue is what the program structure has been, and the green is what we're proposing to change. So previously there had been an analytical committee in the program, and we're proposing to not do away with the analytical committee per se, but to utilize the current assessment science committee that the commission already has to fulfill that role of the analytical committee. And one reason for this is we're really looking to better tie the field biologist and survey biologist in with the stock assessment scientists. So it's all too common that the stock assessment scientists get to an assessment, and we're trying to fit the model to the data that we're giving. And a lot of times the models that we're exploring are limited by our data. So we'd really like to make a better tie between the surveys and the science so that going forward we can talk to the assessment scientists and say, what data is it that you need? How can we change and modify our surveys and make them better so that we're getting the data that the assessments need? So by having the Assessment Science Committee give us that feedback, it's an existing body, very knowledgeable. We'll connect them with the other committees under NEMAP and hopefully make that communication a little better going forward. The Survey Technical Committee, we would like to change that. It's right now the Trawl Technical Committee, but as I said, we're looking to expand it to just not trawl surveys, incorporate other surveys as well, so we thought broadening the name of the committee to Survey Technical Committee would be more appropriate. And this committee is going to be responsible for setting some of the data standards for the surveys. So I mentioned we have 3 surveys under the NEMAP umbrella already, and we're looking to expand that. So the Survey Technical Committee will start by drafting some of the standards that a particular survey would need to have in place for their survey before it could be adopted under the NEMAP program. And a stakeholder advisory panel is not one that we've populated yet, but we're looking to do that in the future so we can get input from stakeholders as well on the surveys. We also developed a revised mission, goals, and objectives, and this was in your meeting materials. So NEMAP's mission and goals were revised to reflect the shift from design and implementation to enhanced coordination and methodology. And the revised goals and objectives address collection and analysis of fishery-independent data to support assessments and management, enhancing coordination among fishery-independent surveys, promoting use and dissemination of that data, identifying and prioritizing short and long-term needs, and securing funding to support NEMAP activities. For short and long-term funding, the Maine New Hampshire Inshore Trawl Survey has full level funding for 2018 and 2019, and we're expecting some funding shortfalls possible for oncoming years, approximately $50,000 to $150,000. The Massachusetts Bottom Trawl Survey is fully funded for 2018 and beyond, so we don't have any immediate concerns for that survey. The Southern New England Mid-Atlantic Trawl Survey has full level funding for 2018 and 2019, but again, we're expecting some shortfalls possible in the realm of $200,000 to $300,000 per year. So funding for these surveys continues to be a concern. Some of the next steps for the program: the Survey Technical Committee is going to have a conference call on November 15th. The Assessment Science Committee engagement on summit action items will occur in fall/winter 2018. The Operations Committee will have a call in early 2019 and will also organize a NEMAP annual meeting in person in early 2019. We're also looking to do a maturity staging workshop in 2019, and we're going to continue to do NEMAP outreach, including presenting at waterfront festivals, to really try to so-called rebrand NEMAP and really change that misconception, let people know what the program is about and what we're looking to do in the near future. We're also going to continue to repopulate the committees and work on the committee action items. And with that, we can take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. That's a great summary, and thanks for the mention for the New York survey. We're really happy about that. Questions for Nicole? Jay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Nice job, Nicole. Thanks for that. So first, I'll cheerlead a little bit and say NEMAP is also, I didn't see this in the list. You may have had it, and I apologize if I missed it. But for the ecological reference point group, the food habits data that NEMAP collects is going to be an integral and important data source for that project. So it's beyond just the kind of standard survey information they collect. It's a really robust set of information, in particular the VIMS portion of the survey. So good stuff. Just wanted to offer that. And then my comment is, so NEMAP is really unique in that the industry tends to favor NEMAP. They think highly of it. A lot of that has to do with the VIMS portion of the survey. It's run by a really respected captain. They're familiar with it. One of the biggest attributes of NEMAP is that aspect of it, that there is pretty significant industry buy-in into that survey information. And so I guess I would just offer a note of caution as this idea of rebranding is developed. Keep that in mind, because I don't know how people would feel about it, you know, bringing in, not that we shouldn't do this, but just be careful with the rebranding, because I think there's such an important aspect of NEMAP, that industry buy-in. Bringing in the government-run surveys is probably going to be tricky. So just wanted to offer that, think about it, and that's it for me, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
So thanks, Jason. I can certainly appreciate that. And one of the things that we're going to be focusing on is really highlighting that the program is collaboration among the surveys. We're not necessarily trying to make significant changes, but we're trying to collaborate among the surveys and develop standards and criteria that all the surveys under the NEMAP umbrella have in common and should be following, so to standardize all the surveys along the coast, and again, tie in the assessment scientists with the surveys to collect better data. So I can certainly appreciate that. That's how we're going to kind of tackle it, is we're trying to standardize the surveys along the coast and make sure that they're all following the same protocols.
David Pierce.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. But just first a comment. It'll be very important for NEMAP to make available to the policy board and to others the degree to which all of this information, all the survey information, is actually used in assessments. I don't think it's all in one place or easily accessible, and that's what it's all about. So, just a point that needs to be done or enhanced if it has already been done. I haven't seen it in a while. Now, you mentioned that one of the concerns expressed by the group, maybe it happened at that workshop or that summit back in January and February, was offshore wind. Now, I know that the Northeast Fisheries Science Center has expressed great concern about the sites for offshore wind, southern New England primarily, and they've indicated quite clearly that they're going to lose tows. It's going to impact the federal survey. Is there any plan for the Survey Technical Committee and Assessment Science Committee, once they're actually formed and off and running, to dig deeper into this issue, since these sites are going to be up and down the coast in many areas where the wind farms take place? So what's the plan regarding tackling that problem of potentially losing important survey sites due to offshore wind development?
So I can say that we started talking about it at the summit. We talked about it again on our operations conference call coming up. It's going to continue to be a subject that we talk about. One thing that was proposed was to really get an understanding of the impacts that these offshore wind sites might have. Is first, we'd like to get some GIS data and overlay all of the surveys on top of the wind farm sites to really see what the impact might be and kind of take it from there. I know that there's also, I think there's a plan to talk with the Commission and BOEM and kind of make BOEM aware of these issues in case they aren't already. We don't have a definitive plan outlined at this point, but it is something high on our radar that we're going to continue with. Because as you said, it is going to be a significant problem, especially for the Science Center survey.
And Jay, just to add to that, we've been, with the activities going on in New York, we've been heavily involved, like you have been, and the issue about protecting the commercial fisheries and trawling and spacing of the towers and things like that. I mean, we were hopefully that if we accommodate the commercial fishing, that wouldn't impact those stations significantly. But yeah, we'll see as it unfolds. Thanks, Joe Cimino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Nicole. I wanted to echo Jay's comments and just say that I agree that industry buy-in, but also that industry tie-in I see it as a huge value and also a real testament to Captain Rule and to VEMS. And it sparked the thought that maybe as you consider new surveys, there are surveys where industry cooperation can get some priority onto becoming part of this monitoring program. And then just to what David had said, when we talked at the last state directors meeting about ASMFC's role in offshore wind, I think that that may be one part of it, just to help coordinate all the different regional efforts on trying to deal with these types of challenges, including the survey work. So, thanks.
Thanks, Joe. Other questions for Nicole? Okay, seeing none, we're going to have to, we have as an action item, we have to essentially approve the new structure, the mission and the goals. So, Justin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I move to approve the revised missions, goals, and objectives for the Northeast Area Monitoring and Assessment Program, and also to approve changes to the Northeast Area Monitoring and Assessment Program committee structure as presented.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Tom Foti. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, we will adopt the motion by unanimous consent. Great. And anyone who's never gone on one of the NEMAP cruises, I highly recommend you go on it. And if you have a choice, go out with Jimmy Rule. You'll never forget it. He's an interesting guy. And even though he says he's from North Carolina, he's actually originally from New York. Okay, next we're going to have an update on the River Herring Technical Expert Working Group, and Tony's going to lead that. Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you thought I was going to talk to you about the River Herring Technical Working Group, but Caitlin was going to give a presentation on the TUG and some ways that she and the NOAA counterpart at the TUG thought that we might be able to make some changes to the TUG in order to provide better information back to the management board. But NOAA asked that we not make any structural changes to the TUG until after the 5-year ESA review of River Herring comes out, and that should be coming out early next year. And so we're going to hold off on that until that occurs. So, and that is also another bit of information that review will be coming out soon. I'll take any questions if there are any.
Okay, seeing none, we'll move right along. And Lisa's running up here quickly. We're going to have some standing committee reports, and the first one's an update from the Atlantic Coastal Fish Habitat Partnership, and Lisa's going to lead us on that as soon as you get settled in. Take your time, Lisa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be very brief because our meetings are happening in 2 weeks, so I don't have much to update you on, but I'll have a lot to discuss in the winter meeting. So I'll start with the Habitat Committee. Like I just said, our in-person meeting will be held November 4th in Newburyport, Massachusetts, so I'll provide a summary at our winter meeting. But we do have a Living Shorelines fact sheet that I'm looking for approval and discussion on if you have any. In 2010, the Commission published Living Shorelines, Impacts of Erosion Control Strategies on Coastal Habitats. And since then, there's been a growing body of literature and lessons learned. The Habitat Committee wanted to produce a brief 2-page fact sheet to supplement this 2010 document. The fact sheet is not exhaustive. It's just a 2-pager that features background information, links to websites for more information, and lessons learned. And then it will also contain a link to more information housed on the Commission's website, including case studies and further reading, which includes reports and publications. And this was provided to you all in the supplemental materials for board approval. And with that, I'll take any questions on the Habitat Committee, and we can discuss the fact sheet if you have any, if you'd like.
Questions for Lisa? Steve.
Yeah, Lisa, just a comment. You may want to follow up with the NIPS lab down in Beaufort, because I know they're doing some they did some pre and post and now post-hurricane assessments of some of the living shorelines they had constructed down there. So I could probably get you some names after the meeting. Thanks.
Okay, Tom Foti.
I was just wondering if the Habitat Committee is considering doing a workshop one day and inviting the commissioners on endocrine disruptors and how they're affecting fish populations. I put on a couple of workshops in New Jersey and other places on this. And I think it'd be interesting to pull in the commissioners because a lot of them don't realize some of the aspects that are going on, especially the new commissioners. So I was wondering if we could think about doing that at some point in time and holding a workshop where you not just have the Habitat Committee meeting, because none of us are, because it's always in conflict, especially when we're doing it at an existing meeting to try and get at the Habitat Committee the way we used to be able to do when I was chair back many years ago. So.
Thanks. That's a good suggestion. Tony and I have been having conversations on how to better integrate the Habitat Committee with the commissioners, and I think that's a good example of how to do that. So I'll follow up with you after the meeting to get some more ideas, and I'll bring that up at our meeting in November as well.
Other questions for Lisa? Okay, seeing none, we need to have an approval of the Living Shorelines fact sheet, and again, that was in your briefing material, so we're going to need a motion for that. Anybody want to try? Tom Foti.
I so move.
We have a second? Justin? Justin Davis seconds the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Any objection to the motion? Seeing none, we will adopt that Living Shoreline fact sheet as approved. Thanks, Lisa. Next up is Law Enforcement Committee and, sorry, Lisa.
And just one slide on ACFIP right now. Again, we'll be meeting November 15th to 16th in Newburyport, Massachusetts as well, so I'll present more information at our winter meeting. But I wanted to give a brief overview of our FY 2019 NIFHAP U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service funding. We received 9 proposals this year. 7 were fish passage projects, and 2 were other projects, so that includes shellfish, SAV, and tidal restoration. They were coming from the North Atlantic, Mid-Atlantic, and South Atlantic. We did not receive any proposals from South Florida this year, and I will give you more information on specific proposals and the ones that we recommend for funding at our winter meeting. And as usual, I would like to thank the Commission for your continued operational support and welcome any questions.
Questions on ACFIP for Lisa? Nope, seeing none. Okay, thank you, Lisa. Now we will move on to the Law Enforcement Committee and Mark Robson. Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Law Enforcement Committee met Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. We had a very productive and interesting meeting, and thanks to the staff and commission members who were in attendance. This was kind of a meeting of updates and continuing issues, but a couple of things related to Block Island transit zones. We had some preliminary review and provided some initial feedback to staff on any law enforcement issues with the proposed transit zones for flounder, scup, black sea bass, and potentially for a transit zone discussions or changes to transit zones for striped bass. There were no significant concerns addressed, but we will be able to provide additional feedback at a later time when those issues bubble up more. We also discussed the ongoing issues with American lobster and enforcement concerns and management. You heard some discussion about the possibility of offshore enforcement subcommittee work to look at how we can move forward with improving and enhancing enforcement in the offshore areas. And the Law Enforcement Committee stands ready and willing and able with a number of participants available to assist on that subcommittee. And we had some discussion about that, which would include both federal and state partners on the Law Enforcement Committee to provide good input on how we can move forward with some of those enforcement needs for the offshore areas, especially in Area 3. We also had a presentation from Andy Loftus from the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council. At least one member of the Law Enforcement Committee is going to be participating in a for-hire enforcement workshop that the Mid-Atlantic Council is putting forward in November, and this would deal primarily with discussions about the responsibilities of for-hire captains for enforcement issues or catches on their vessels. So the Law Enforcement Committee for the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission will be participating in that workshop,
In fact, we've been participating at the planning level as well, so it was very good that we were able to get involved in that discussion. We had some some general discussions regarding any enforcement issues or problems with undersized fish, or, for example, fish that may be legal in one state being marketed in another state where they're actually undersized. And there really weren't any significant enforcement concerns raised regarding these issues, provided that the usual amount of, especially if they're tagged fish, but also any necessary documentation, bills of lading and so forth, paperwork is included. The issue of undersized fish being sold from one state to another based on differences in legal requirements or size limits can be addressed from an enforcement point of view. So there were no significant concerns raised in that discussion. It was primarily surrounding some striped bass issues that were brought up with regard to Maryland's sale in states where Maryland fish are undersized. We also had a continuing discussion about landings flexibility. We know this is something that continues to be an issue of discussion for the Commission, and we just talked a little bit more about some of the enforcement concerns that could be addressed if states do move forward with landings flexibility or allowance for landings from other states to be brought to shore in a neighboring state, and recognizing that this may be something that we'll be looking at in the future on a more regular basis. There are mechanisms that the Law Enforcement Committee discussed that could be implemented to aid in enforcement and avoid any problems with shenanigans, I guess, if you allow landings in a state with a vessel that has landings from other states' waters. We provided a written summary of the meeting for more detail, and you can refer to that, or certainly if you have any questions, you can ask me. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Questions for Mark? Dave Borden.
Not a question, Mr. Chairman, just a comment, if that's all right.
Go ahead.
I attended the Law Enforcement Committee, and thank you very much, Mark, for the report. And just would like to comment that on the issue of the offshore enforcement, about the committee, the Enforcement Committee, from my perspective, has developed that very well, but they've gotten to the point, I think, where we need a slightly different mix of individuals to discuss that. They had individuals on the committee from New Hampshire, Maine, and I think Rhode Island, in addition to OLE and the Coast Guard, kind of volunteer to be like a subcommittee to work through the remaining administrative issues. And I think there might be some benefit in having some policy board representation. So my only suggestion here, I'm not going to make it as a motion, is that the chair and vice chair and executive director have the authority to pick a few members of the policy board and put them together with this committee that Mark has assembled, and they would have a meeting, and that would be paid for by the money that the executive committee approves.
Okay. Why don't we just, for that moment, take it? Do you have a comment on that, Richie, or something new?
Yes, on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to reinforce David's comments. I think the Commission kind of needs to see, take a look at what is the leadership in this effort. So, is law enforcement, is that the correct body? Obviously, they're hugely involved in figuring out the details and everything. Would it be advantageous to have the Commission or a subcommittee of the Commission kind of take leadership of it to help law enforcement pull this off and possibly help to work if we get into the congressional delegations for additional money? And so I guess my suggestion is that the Commission leadership look at, what should the role going forward be and who should lead this effort. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's a good idea, and if everybody's comfortable with it, I think we'll discuss that with the leadership, and we'll come up with what, adding some breadth to that committee. I think that's a great idea. So, and any objection to that at the table? Okay, great. Other questions? Dan.
Thank you. Regarding Mark Robson's report about the non-conforming striped bass, this was brought up by one of the Newark proxies who's a member of the Maryland Watermen's Association, and he approached me from the Commonwealth as well as my New York colleagues, because we in our states have the biggest seafood distribution centers. But I think that the policy board ought to address this in some kind of a future discussion, because having been on the right and wrong end of a few Commerce Clause lawsuits in my career, it seems like the Commission has been a little bit remiss in terms of dealing with the seafood distribution aspects of a lot of these species. There are clear instances where a state can have rules that require the out-of-state product to conform to in-state, especially when there's a substantial enforcement challenge. But in the case of striped bass, that is the gold standard of verification. And so I think the whole board would be well served to have a conversation about the Dormant Commerce Clause, the shipping of seafood products across borders, and not to mention the fact that we have many states that don't allow the commercial sale of striped bass because they don't have a commercial quota, but they're still restricting the sale of fish of that particular species when the tagging is clearly effective and clearly verifiable. So I would suggest that a future policy board discussion focus on that.
Yeah, I don't disagree, Dan. Having dealt with it on lobsters a couple of years back, and it does get kind of messy, and didn't think it was a big a problem until you suddenly were told you were going to lose by the federal government. So I think it's a good point, and I'll talk with Bob about it, and we'll come up with some idea of how to, yeah, not a bad suggestion. Other questions for Mark? Okay, thank you, Mark, and let's move on now to the next section, which is the Assessment Science Committee, and actually we're going to review changes to the stock assessment schedule, and Sarah Murray's going to lead us with that. Sarah?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, so the Assessment Science Committee met on September 25th to discuss several agenda items, including the review of the stock assessment schedule. Since the board approved the schedule last in October 2017, there have been a few changes, which I'll review. Note that I know this is very small up on the screen. The stock assessment schedule is in your meeting materials. So the changes that have happened since the board last approved are the horseshoe crab benchmark assessment moved from October 2018 to March 2019 peer review, and a board presentation in May 2019. The cobia stock assessment through CDAR moved from June 2019 to August 2019 peer review, and a board presentation in October 2019. The Spanish mackerel stock assessment through CDAR is scheduled for 2020. And there are a few MRIP operational assessments for black sea bass, scup, bluefish, which will use the new MRIP data and be completed in April 2019 and presented to the board in August 2019. If there are any questions, no?
Questions for Sarah? Adam Nowalski.
Thank you. So a lot of these updates that were referenced are a result of the re-estimation of the recreational numbers. The one recreational species on here that doesn't have anything scheduled, although has a tentative time frame, tautog. What do we do with the recreational estimates in the meantime? Just keep saving them, sticking them in a corner until we do some benchmark? I would think we'd want some information sooner versus later. You seem very excited about this topic, so.
Oh, good, Katie's here.
So obviously this is a question that's come up several times, and you are correct, tautog is not currently on the schedule for a benchmark, I believe we're considering an update. So the issue with Tautog, obviously, is that we did very recently put in new management changes in order to reduce F. And so I think the concern of the TC and the ASC was that we would like to see those management changes propagate through the fishery a little bit more before we do an assessment update to get a better grasp on kind of where we stand with this fishery. For Tautog, there's not a recreational quota, so we do not need to re-estimate any quota to be compared to the new numbers. And our expectation with the new numbers is that this will scale the population but not really change the trends, so that we're not expecting a change in status with the new numbers. So we've sort of deprioritized this in terms of having the assessment update done immediately, and instead this will give it a couple more years or a year or two more to propagate through the changes in management, and then do an assessment update to reflect both the new MRIP numbers and the changes in management to get a better handle on where we are with Tautog after that, and let a few more high priority species with recreational quotas go through first.
Go ahead, Adam.
So I guess I just think of the decisions that were made as a result of the last management action, and it does give me pause to, if we had had the updated estimates, would that have given us a different picture at the time, perhaps with regards to the regions or just overall health of the resource? So I think I don't know if it's a discussion specific to that species board moving forward about just having some information as a result of the re-estimates that we're being told has to come through some assessment update process, but yet I think it would be informative to us. So.
So obviously the issue with Tautog is that we're not talking about a single assessment update. We're talking about 4 assessment updates, and so the amount of work required to update to do a complete update of those assessments is not trivial for the TC, many of whom are involved in several other assessments going on. We certainly can bring these new numbers to the board, and I think it would probably be worthwhile for the board to look at. We had recommended a cut based on a certain set of years in order to reduce fishing mortality, and we could look at the changes in numbers relative, the updated numbers relative to an updated reduction that was required, and see how that's performing in recent years. Obviously, if the policy board or the Tautog board feels that this is a high priority, we can re-examine the workload, but I just want to emphasize that it is not a trivial exercise to update this species in particular.
Thanks, Katie. Rob O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Sarah. So I guess I just want to make sure I understand the black sea bass approach there in April of 2019. It sounded as if you said that would utilize the new MRIP estimates, and I may have been under the wrong impression, but I thought what was going to happen, that even though that's the case, there would be a back calibration to the older MRIP estimates for this update, and then by the time there would be a benchmark, then it would be straight new MRIP. So has that changed a little bit?
Rob, I can fill in here, and I can actually give a little bit more information than I could have at the Summer Flounder Scup Black Sea Bass Board. So it's an operational assessment that'll go through for black sea bass, scup, and bluefish through the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. All of those operational assessments will include the new MRIP information, not back calibrated. That new information will be peer reviewed, to my understanding, not through a CIE peer review, but most likely an SSC review. And those assessment reports, we're being told, will be available on May 2nd. So it's a little bit later than we thought. The Mid-Atlantic Council's SSC will meet May 7th. I did talk to Brandon yesterday, and he believes that the SSC should be able to take a look at that information on the 7th of May in order to be able to provide an update to the council at their June meeting if necessary for changes in specifications that the council could then make a recommendation to NOAA to change specifications for that species. in order to change specifications to go through the NOAA process, it's highly likely that those specifications wouldn't be finalized until August or September. If we were to ask to do changes in the recreational specifications, that would require an EA, and that likely would be an additional month. So then it would be either September, October for NOAA to change rec regs to go along with that black sea bass. So that is a bit of an update from what we could give yesterday.
Other questions? Okay, this is another action item, so we're going to need a motion to approve the modified schedule. Anybody out there? Doug.
I would move to approve the stock assessment schedule as modified today.
Thanks, Doug. A second? Roy Miller. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, we will adopt that by unanimous consent. Great. Thanks, Sarah. Our next item is, Katie's already here, so she's going to first take us through the benchmark updates on the stock assessments for shad and our favorite topic, the Menhaden ecological reference points. Katie.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with shad, I'm here to give the assessment update in place of Jeff Kipp today. The TC and the SAS met via webinar in September to kind of review some of the analyses that need to be complete in time for the methods workshop, which will happen November 5th through 8th. We are making progress on this assessment, but it has been slowed by some of the data issues that I think Jeff brought to your attention at the last board update in September, in that missed deadlines, missing data, some data quality cleaning control issues that have slowed down some of this work. If things continue on pace, we will continue on pace, but it just depends on everybody getting their work done and all the data in on time. So we'll have a better sense of our progress once the November workshop is complete. So I'll take questions on shad, I guess. But
Justin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Katie, I'm wondering if you can comment on the degree to which the shad benchmark is addressing the issue of aging that species with scales versus otoliths. Is that something that's going to come up at the methods workshop next month? Yeah, absolutely. That's something the TCs has put together a whole little subgroup on, and it is certainly one of the big issues of how reliable are those scale ages, and what are we going to do with them, since that's a major source of our age data.
Any other questions? Okay, want to move on to the ERPs?
So Menhaden and the ERP work group had our second data workshop from October 9th through October 12th. We've been trying to keep these assessment meetings in parallel as much as possible. So the ERP work group met the second half of the week, and the Menhaden SAS met the first half of the week in order to discuss data and make sure that we're getting our data decisions made, to keep these kind of assessments moving in parallel as much as possible, so that the data that we're using across the assessments is as consistent as possible. We are basically going to have a webinar once a month for the next year in order to complete this assessment, but we are still on track to complete this assessment for a review the first week of November 2019 through the CDAR process, which means that the assessment will be available for the board in February of 2020, as has been the schedule the entire time. And I think we are making good progress in terms of the data availability and the data processing for this workshop. We will have our first assessment workshop probably in early March, again, for both the ERP group and for the Menhaden, to keep these consistent and parallel.
Any questions on the ERPs? Okay, see you done. Thanks, Katie. We're moving very quickly. Great. We're up to non-compliance findings, which we don't have any, so we can jump right up to other business. And it looks like Bob's just not had enough letters to write, so the boards have risen to the occasion, and Tony's going to lead us through the letters. So, Tony.
I'm going to tee off each of the letters since a lot of the board chairs aren't here, and I last minute asked the vice chairs to read the motion, so I'm not going to completely throw them under the bus to try to get this stuff done. So the first letter that we've been requested to write is regarding Jonah crab, and it's both the states of Delaware and New York have not put in place several components of the Jonah crab FMP. The management board delayed any decisions on compliance until the winter meeting, but the board did request that we send letters to both of those states informing them that they haven't put the regulations in place and to please get those regulations into place. So Dan is going to read the motion that Jess is going to put up.
Thank you. Motion on behalf of the American Lobster Management Board. I move the policy board send letters to Delaware and New York to request they come back into compliance with the Jonah crab FMP.
Do we have a second to that motion?
You don't need a second.
Oh, I'm sorry, we don't need a second. It's by the committee. So is there any discussion on the motion? Is there any objection to the motion? Let's have a vote. No. Yeah, no, we'll adopt that by unanimous consent, and John and I will go and have a drink later on. Go ahead, Tony.
Our next letter is for striped bass. The striped bass received a presentation on the pre-proposal, I like to say, of NOAA Fisheries considering opening up the transit zone to striped bass fishing in federal waters. And the board is requesting a delay in any rulemaking until after the benchmark assessment. And since Mike is not here, David, you are the vice chair, if you could do that motion on behalf of the striped bass board.
Yeah, on behalf of the Atlantic Striped Bass Management Board, I move that the policy board submit a letter to NOAA requesting a delay on further action on the Block Island transit zone until such time as the board has an opportunity to review the striped bass benchmarks, stock assessment, and formalize a recommendation.
Okay, motion by the board doesn't need a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? Is it? You want to, for an abstention, is it? Okay, yeah, so we'll essentially, NOAA Fisheries will abstain, and the rest of it will adopt by unanimous consent. Okay, next.
Next is spiny dogfish. The spiny dogfish did specifications at this meeting, and in their discussion of the specifications, they talked about the trip limit and their desire to have the Mid-Atlantic Council put into their priorities for 2019, examining the federal trip limit. The commission splits the spiny dogfish quota into the northern region, and then the southern states have the ability to have individual state quotas and set their own trip limits. The southern states find that the federal trip limit is constraining in allowing the states to actually achieve their utilize their full quotas, and so are looking for a different federal trip limit. So, Rob.
I'll start with on behalf. On behalf of the Spiny Dogfish Management Board, I move that the policy board send a letter to the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council requesting that federal trip limits be a 2019 priority item.
Okay, it's a motion by the board, so no second is necessary. Any discussion on the motion? Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, we will adopt that by unanimous consent. Eel?
Thank you. The eel board had a presentation from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on CITES at this meeting, and through the discussion, the state of Maine had brought up their concerns that there is a lack of enforcement of regulations, in particular the inspection of crates once they get to, I think mostly the airports, and that unless there is an inspection of the eels, for those eels to actually be weighed to confirm that it is the shipment, it really puts the FMP in jeopardy. And so the board requested that we send a letter to Fish and Wildlife Service to emphasize the importance of those inspections. And Marty is our eel board chair.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the American Eel Management Board, I move that the Policy Board send a letter to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to emphasize the importance and enforcement of eel regulations, including inspection of eel products.
A motion by Mr. Gary for the board. No seconds necessary. Any discussion on the motion? Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, we will adopt that by unanimous consent. And lastly, Richie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. During the eel board, it was mentioned that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was willing to come and give us a report about some of their actions, in this regard. And I don't recall that we asked for that formally at the eel board. So maybe if that's something, if there's no objection to that, that's something we could request.
Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I can take that request back to our law enforcement lead on the issue.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Okay, and now Herring.
All right, and Mike, I can let you know when the eel board would meet next so we could coordinate that. Kirby and I can work with you. So lastly is the Atlantic Herring Management Board. The Herring Board discussed spawning regulations at this meeting. In particular, making changes to spawning regulations in our current management area where we have them in Gulf of Maine, as well as talking about taking and putting similar regulations into Georges Bank and the Nantucket Shoals area. We recognize that these areas are in federal waters, and we have partners with the New England Fishery Management Council that manage those federal waters. And so we are requesting that the New England Fishery Management Council make spawning regulations a priority in 2019. And David Pierce is the vice chair of that management board.
David?
Yeah, thank you, Tony. You summarized the issue very well. So on behalf of the Atlantic Herring Management Board, I move that the Policy Board send a letter to the New England Fishery Management Council requesting that they consider herring spawning protection in its 2019 priorities.
Thank you, David. Does not require a second since it's from the board. Is there any discussion on the motion? Is there any objection to the motion? Okay, seeing none, we will adopt that by unanimous consent. Any more, Tony? Great. It turns out we have one other item in other business, and I will recognize the Resolutions Committee, and I believe Eric Reed is going to take over. Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Resolutions Committee met in typical disjointed fashion, but we've come up with a resolution to the 77th annual meeting, host state of New York. Whereas the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission conducted its 77th annual meeting in the vibrant and energetic city of New York, New York, which provided magnificent venue for the commissioners, commission staff, and law enforcement committee members to deliberate on issues of mutual concern. And whereas the weather was deliciously gorgeous and cacophonously temperate days and spiritedly crisp nights. And whereas the location of the aforesaid meeting was inspired by the timeless words of the great Jefferson, that would be George, not Thomas. We're all moving on up to the east side. The commission decamped to the well-located and stately Roosevelt Hotel, where hot water in the hotel rooms was only available at extra cost. And coffee, forget about it. And whereas the meeting began at Mad 46, which gave new meaning to the phrase, "You can't get there from here," and we received practical Yankee hospitality from the perpetually frustrated Yankees fan, Chairman Jim Gilmore, he of stout stock from the Bronx, I think the Bronx, and provided the perfect venue to renew old friendships and start many new ones. Whereas the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission family contributed significantly to the economy by frequently and tenaciously exploring local cuisine, waterfront, shops, museums, and the purchase of the very reasonably priced street meat. And whereas the chances of winning the Powerball or Mega Millions in Manhattan is lousy just like everywhere else. Whereas Uncle Paul's Pizza is very grateful for the uptick in business this week. Whereas the Commission enjoyed an inspiring visit to the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum aboard the USS Intrepid, where we recognized the outstanding leadership and habitat conservation efforts of Eric Anderson from Florida, with the Commission's Melissa Laser Habitat Conservation Award. Whereas the spousal tour of Ellis Island was greatly enjoyed by our spouses, as well as the 76,367 other tourists in front of them in line, or the 1,323,488, according to the estimates derived from the new MRIP technology. And during their 90 minutes on the island, during which it was reported that the group encountered 37 distinct languages, none of which, interestingly enough, have a word that serves as the equivalent of use. Whereas the Commission's annual photo was efficiently and expeditiously secured through the good offices and keen eyes of the witty and talented Laura Leach and Tina Berger. And whereas the 27th annual Laura Leach Fishing Tournament produced the most enthusiastic of participants, particularly in the personage of the winner, Diane Gilmore, and would not thwart the best of the Commission's anglers in posting winning catches, thanks to the expert guidance and enthusiastic tutelage of Emeritus Commissioner Pat Augustine. Whereas the annual dinner aboard the motor vessel Celestial, which is Bateau, New York, provided a magnificent cruise, inspirational nighttime views of Manhattan, Brooklyn, Lady Liberty, and Hoboken, outstanding metropolitan cuisine, exceptional musical entertainment, and a moving ode to rising from the ashes through cooperation and mutual respect in Chairman Gilmore's annual address to the Commission. Whereas the 28th annual David H. Hart Award recognized Roy Miller of the First State for his tremendous and sustained contributions to the successful management of marine fisheries along the Atlantic coast. Whereas the Commission continues to grapple with challenges and issues including changing ocean conditions, new political dynamics and scrutiny, and strong external forces pushing us apart, we take comfort in the words described in the aforementioned George Jefferson's changing station in life. Well, we're all moving up to the east side, to a deluxe apartment in the sky. Moving on up to the east side, we finally got a piece of the pie. And I think that's a reallocation, but I'm not really sure about that. So now, therefore, be it resolved that the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission express its profound appreciation to the New York Commissioners, Jim Gilmore, Emerson Hasbrook, and Senator Phil Boyle, and all of the staff of the Department of Environmental Conservation, especially Stephanie Reckemeyer, right? Okay. For their terrific assistance in the planning and execution of the outstanding 77th annual meeting and showing all of us the true meaning of sophisticated grace and cosmopolitan hospitality. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you all, and very well done, Eric. That was outstanding. Great job by the Resolutions Committee. And I think after that, other than to mention, I mentioned the staff, and so, two of the staff could have gone on the fishing trip today. They were one, but it's Tony and Tina both. They're so dedicated. They stayed back to do their job. So I think that's more outstanding than anything, because that was a great sacrifice. So thank you guys for sticking around. And with that, we are adjourned, and I hope you all had a great time.
We will start the South Atlantic Board in 10 minutes.